Oh, yes. This is the Hardcore Marketing Show. I'm Casey Cheshire, your host for this epic journey. And today's show, sponsored by Cheshire Impact, on a mission to help people maximize their use of Pardot and Salesforce. CheshireImpact.com. Bam. Okay, I hit a button, everyone. And I got to tell you, this guest, when I was loading the Zoom today, I was getting kind of excited. You know, the kind of excited where you say something out loud and you can barely talk because you're so excited about this thing. And I got to tell you, I would just kind of fall over myself describing her, but I actually love how she and many people describe her as this multidisciplinary marketing Swiss Army knife. And I would add a leader, a thought leader, also a trained journalist who brings that curiosity into marketing, which I think is so missing in a lot of things we do today. Founder of the invite-only content marketing leaders Slack channel. Interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that. Maybe it's classified. Senior Director of Marketing at PathFactory, Cassandra Jowett. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
Yeah, I probably missed a few things too, but thank you so much for being on here. This is going to be fun.
Definitely.
So I know there's something that you're constantly talking about in helping people perfect, and there's a lot of misunderstandings. It's the idea of events and the idea of virtual events, and a lot of people are having Zoom fatigue. There's all these things going on. So what I want to do here is hold on, this thing's heavy. I'm going to pass this to you. Ugh. Okay, here you go. Here's Thor's hammer. You got it? You got to take it? Okay, good. Yep. All right, there you go. Not so heavy, right? It's pretty good. So yeah, take Thor's hammer and smash for me some kind of myth, bogus strategy, misconception. Set the record straight once and for all.
Virtual events don't have to have all of the same things as in-person events. That's my B2B marketing mythbuster for right now.
They don't have to have all the same things. So what, people are just trying to recreate everything they did in person virtually?
Yeah, I think that's been the norm for a really long time, especially when it comes to, okay, we have a booth at in-person events, so we have to have a virtual booth, and we have a lunch break, so we have to have a lunch break at the virtual event, and we have a musical guest, so we have to have an evening musical guest at the virtual event, rather than trying to think about holistically what would actually make a great virtual experience. And I don't necessarily have all the answers there, but I think if we start from a place of, this is a totally new thing, this is not an in-person event, and so we can't just replicate the same old stuff we've been doing in trade show halls for the last 50 years or whatever. Hopefully we can get to a better place, both in terms of results for the business, but also the experience for the people who are actually attending those events, especially since there's so very many of them going on right now.
Wow, this is the approach I think is needed, because everyone kind of has this sense that, okay, we can do the Zoom thing, but I don't know. I've seen a couple events and I'm just like not interested, or if I am, it feels weird, like forced. And it sounds like you've got to the root of the question, which is, it's not the same thing. So stop trying to use the same terminology and the same, are there going to be virtual cookies and coffee in the back for me to have too? Like, no, it's virtual. Go get your own cookies like this. But like, even using the same vocabulary, it does make people comfortable, I guess, if they know what the words are, but it's not the same.
Yeah. I mean, I think it just lacks creativity, and it means that, not to put too much judgment on my fellow B2B
Shots fired. No, you already did it. I love it.
I'm there too. It's a lot harder to come up with something that new, but we have to keep in mind that, number one, there's a totally different context that people are experiencing these events through, both in terms of, the fact that it's virtual and not in person, but also just like, we're all at home right now, or
Right.
Most of us are at home right now. And so, there are many other things going on, and there are partners and kids and pets and delivery people and, all kinds of stuff going on. Whereas when you're at a conference, that's probably usually the most divorced you are from your regular life, because you have a hotel room and your family isn't around you usually. And there aren't all those distractions. So you can kind of get super focused, although I've definitely been guilty of cracking open my laptop and working on some stuff during some sessions that weren't exactly what I thought they would be. So you kind
Right.
of get that blending there. But for the most part, this is a whole new experience that we're all kind of going through. And then also, there just aren't the sheer number of competitive events going on. While I think events have really been on the rise, despite marketers complaining about them, how expensive they are and how much work they are and stuff. I feel like there had, just before the pandemic started, there had really never been more conferences and trade shows and meetups and all that kind of stuff, because people genuinely love, meeting other humans in person and
Right.
having that community around them. So, there was some competition, but you really can't be in two places at once. Whereas virtually, there's so many things that you could do at one time. And, when you have back-to-back meetings plus virtual events plus your work plus all these other things, it's really difficult to stay focused. And I think it's also unreasonable as marketers to expect that we're going to hold someone's attention, for example, for 4 full days of content while
Right.
someone is sitting at home in their office or on their couch. And whereas that's really the norm, for in-person trade shows. So just things like that, where even just rethinking the length and the amount of content and all that kind of stuff going on, because people are just not going to do it. Like, I'm not going to name names, but we sponsored and attended a virtual conference, one of the very first ones. So I have to give them credit for pivoting really quickly, but it was
Right.
still, it was going to be a 4-day in-person show. And then it became a 4-day online show with, very similar agenda. And you could just see every day the virtual attendance dropping off to the point where, the sessions as well as the booth traffic on day 4 was a fraction of what it was on day 1, because people are just not going to come back over and over and over again every single day when
Right.
there are so many other things happening. So, as a sponsor and as an attendee, that was one of my biggest pieces of feedback for that team was, 4 days is a lot.
4 days
So
is a lot.
maybe try to compress it or curate it a little bit better so that people aren't feeling like they have to come back 4 days in a row. So even things like that, where, there's sort of a typical conference agenda, you're not going to be able to get everything in. So anyway, I could ramble on about this for a long time. I'll stop there and maybe let you interject a little bit, but just things like that, where you're even rethinking the length and the format and all that sort of stuff is really the beginning. And then you can kind of go into like, what should a session even be? How can people interact with each other and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I want to get to all these things. But I'll first comment on what you're bringing up and just the idea of it. You for sure you can't. It does not equal. There's like a little, you can't have an equal sign between these two. It fails. And your example of the 4-day event, I was kind of laughing to myself as you're describing that, because imagine trying to go tell our bosses to get permission to not sign on virtually for 4 days because we're going to be at an event. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you can reach me by phone, but I'll be in sessions. It just doesn't feel the same. It doesn't. Hey, I'm going over to a virtual Dreamforce here. Don't out of office is up. I'm not around. Of course you're around. You're your computer, the same computer you're normally at.
Yeah.
You're right. It's different, and we do tend to go to conferences for that focus. Or I know if it's a bad session or keynote, we can pull up on our phones. I'm guilty of that, or maybe not guilty. That's just what you do. But at least you're there. And then also there's that magic of meeting the people and colliding with them, that is just so different. But my question to you is, how the hell do you have a virtual trade show booth? And do people like come to it? Or how does that work?
It doesn't work very well, I'll tell you that. And we, PathFactory, just did a survey in the last month of marketers and virtual event attendees, and only 9% of them said that virtual booths were a good experience and a valuable thing to have. So clearly, it's one of those things that I think came about when, the first virtual event platforms were being developed, and they were literally just trying to recreate the expo hall
Right.
online. And so for some of them, like, they have like little virtual booths that are like 3D graphics, and they're like little fake people walking around. And in some cases, each attendee even has their own avatar, and they're like walking around this trade show hall. That's become a bit less common. But what it is now is you'll log in, it'll just be like a big listing, like a web page with like little banner ads for each sponsor, and you can kind of click through. And of course, sponsors are trying to just like normally have incentives for you to visit their booth. They're trying to entice you to come and talk to them by having different content or events or giveaways or whatever it is to come through. And if the platform is gamified a little bit, then it'll encourage you to kind of scroll through and
Oh
visit
yeah.
as many booths as possible. So I've seen all of those things so far, but really what happens is people just click through and they kind of do the bare minimum required for whatever the thing is that they're trying to do. And so it just doesn't mirror the the experience at
Yeah.
all, where like normally you kind of there are a lot of attendees who are just kind of running by the booth and they won't talk to you, but they literally have to ignore a human being trying to connect with them, making eye contact, that
Yes.
kind of stuff, whereas the virtual booths at best, as a booth babe, you're kind of chatting people.
Yep.
So you send them a chat request and say, hey, thanks for visiting our booth, anything I can help you with today, or here's what we're doing, or whatever your hook is to get them to come in, and then try to like suck them into a chat conversation for a little while. And
Oh, in a chat. It's not even video. Like hop
no,
into
it's
a.
a chat. So, we've
Wow.
tried some different things where we'll have a Zoom running that people can click through to actually
Yeah.
interact with a human being. But a lot of people kind of got curious and clicked through and then got freaked out that there was a person there and would jump right away. So we found that having sort of designated times, for example, that they could come in and do that
Right.
better, because sort of like, here's exactly what we're doing and what you'll expect. And so that worked a little bit better. But yeah, it's not like a human is there greeting you. It's just a chat request, and most people do not accept the chat request. So there's no real engagement, and so it's basically a little landing page that people might click through and watch a little bit of content. You might have some videos or
It's
PDFs
gross.
hosted there, and that's basically it. So
Yeah.
it's very basic, and in my opinion, like not a lot of value for anyone who's sponsoring those
Yeah. It
events,
sounds
really.
lame too for everyone involved. Like,
Yeah.
oh, let me look at your marketing collateral. Like, as you're describing, like people trying to get your attention. I was thinking the exact same thing where I I will walk by and kind of like out of my peripheral try to see if there's like a teddy bear I can get for my kids or, you know, free book or something, or what does this company actually do from their tagline? And every now and then there's someone who's like, how's the trade show going? You're like, I'm not that rude guy. So I'm gonna be like, it's going well. And they're like, how's your thing? And I'm like, all right, okay, I'll talk to you. Your
Yeah.
giveaway is good enough. But I could see, like, if I could see cherry picking maybe and being like, oh, these guys will send me a free book if I chat with them for 10 minutes. Well, okay, maybe I will. But at least, but right, or maybe nobody does it. Right, to your point of like, everyone's like, nah.
Yeah, and like I think that the problem is that all of those people who are attending the conference can really find out about any of these vendors online at any time, and fill
Yeah.
out a request a demo form, or
What's the
um,
rush?
you know chat with them on Drift or
Yeah.
whatever tool they're using. So it's not like that provides a unique experience that's not available already, and there isn't really that sort of organic human
Right.
to human conversation. And definitely, speaking as a marketer who sponsors these things, definitely some of the magic that happened at events for PathFactory in particular happened because we have engaging people at our booth who can really know how to reel people in and have great
Yeah.
conversations about marketing. And so you get a lot of great first conversations, but also a lot of great second and third conversations, people kind of just hanging out at your booth because they're learning
Yeah.
stuff, or hanging out because they think you're cool people. And that's just, again, not possible at virtual events at all. So
Right.
um, you kind of lose the magic. And so I think that's where we kind of have to take that as a signal that like that just repurposing it wholesale isn't working, and
Yeah.
we have to come up with a unique format and program for these virtual events, and maybe even invent some new programs and formats that are just completely different, and maybe not have everything all in one big big event once a year, because you're going to miss a lot of people. It's not going to be the right content or format because you just
Yeah.
can't fit it in. And so there are lots of ways to approach it, and I definitely, I think at this stage I'm still in the let's ask questions and let's test things and see what works. That's definitely the period of time that I'm in as a marketer. I wish I could just say, here are all the answers, trust me, I know what
Sure.
I'm talking about. But, after one quarter of being through this pandemic and being all virtual all the time, like, definitely have learned some things about what's worked and what hasn't worked. But, I haven't tried everything. And, when you're trying to pivot in real time when all this stuff is
Yeah.
happening, you also don't always have the opportunity to just sit down and think, like, if I could create the perfect virtual event, like, what would that look like? So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that, as we kind of go through the rest of the year, we'll have a bit more time and space as marketers to think about those experiences, and also, pick some bits and pieces up from things that we like and don't like, and then start to remix them into, virtual events that are truly exceptional and not just sort of tolerable, which I think most
Yeah.
of all of our virtual events today are just pretty tolerable and sometimes educational, but very rarely entertaining or, recreating that magical feeling that you get at these different events and trade shows.
Yeah. Some of the magic that I was thinking about was just not even at the booth. It might be a happy hour, your happy hour, someone else's.
Yeah.
All your collective IQs are like 4. And then you're just like, wow, I like these people. And then you like each other. You're like, then start trusting, like, let's do business together. Like, we weren't even trying to sell each other. We were just like,
Yeah.
oh, these are all good people I've met, the synergy there, the experience there. That sounds right. Um, I want to get into some of the learning lessons. And I know you talk about length and format and session, and just kind of talking through, like you said, we're still learning and testing things, but trying to get a sense for those. One thing that I experienced, and maybe this sort of gives you the context for just launching into this, is I saw an event that was offered in the Salesforce ecosystem, not official. I think it was a partner, and um, something that I hadn't seen before. They offered the speakers the chance to upload the presentation, tape it, record it, upload it, and then they'd put in their format. And logistically, I can see that, okay, if you're going to have 9 presenters all virtually, like, you might need to have a backup content. But then at the same time, by offering these recorded things, I just thought, what's the difference between this and me logging into a recorded webinar, which
Yeah.
already happens? And what's the difference? Is there any difference? So I don't know. That was my experience. I didn't like it. So what do you see? What are you seeing with formats and sessions and recordings and not and all that?
Yeah, that's super common.
Yeah.
As a sponsor, that's sort of the recommended option that a lot of these platforms, and it's a function or a feature of the platform itself.
Yeah.
It's just like safer to record it in advance and upload the video file and then simulive broadcast it and make everyone kind of feel like it's live. And like, that's, when I'm put in that situation where, that's what the conference organizer has recommended, and that's what our customer speaker prefers, for example, like, you're kind of like, okay, like, I don't really want to do
Yeah.
that, but I'm not going to force my customer to go live, especially if they have like a janky internet connection and kids running
Yeah.
around, all the time, and they just want to, devote their private time at some point at like 11 p.m. at night one time to record a
Yeah.
perfect version of their session. Like, I'm not going to say no. And so you try to sort of fake it, and I'm sure every marketer has been there, where you have your list of pre-baked questions that you ask at the end and pretend that those are coming through in the Q&A or something. And,
Yeah.
it's fine. It's totally fine. The content is conveyed, and it's, maybe a little bit stiffer or more perfect than the live versions, but I definitely think there's a bit of magic in live. However, I've also been on the receiving end of glitches and,
Hmm.
customers video dropping altogether, and you have to like get them to come back in. So, there are all kinds of challenges. And I think part of that is that, those platforms, just haven't been optimized for that kind of performance over the years. I think
Yeah.
as marketers, we were kind of like, oh, it's good enough. And like, we mostly get by on in-person events. So we're
Right.
not going to demand incredible innovation from these tools. And we're really seeing the result of that lack of innovation and investment now, where we want to do it all
Yeah.
the time and we want an amazing experience. We want that magic, and it's just like not possible. So, I think that's part of it. And the other part is, when you're recording that, it really does feel like just a webinar. And I think most people don't necessarily have the skills to speak to their slides and sort of moderate and engage with the audience in chat and look at Q&A. Like, that is a pretty sophisticated skill set, and I think you have to be extremely familiar with your content. And if I'm honest, most B2B speakers are really kind of like, they got their slides in the last second and they practiced, half a time in their hotel room or whatever, or in their bedroom the day before, and then they're delivering the content. And again,
Right.
I've totally been there. And so I think there's just like a level of, investment overall, whether it's investment in the tools that are available or investment in the content preparation. All of those things kind of have to be considered in advance, and we just haven't had time to do that. So
Right.
all of those things are really important. But you're totally right. Like, why attend live when you can just watch it later on demand? And I think that's a valid way to experience these things for now, especially when people aren't creating exceptional live
Yeah.
experiences. And really, if you're just there to learn from the speakers, you can kind of pick and choose which on-demand videos you want to watch and go from there. So definitely, I think that's valid. And I think marketers, again, have to prepare for that eventuality, and the fact that a good portion of their audience isn't going to be able to watch live. And you kind of have to think about that on-demand experience as well, which I think marketers are not necessarily used to thinking about. You might get a recording of your customer session, but usually it's really expensive and it's not that great and all that kind of stuff. So you
Yeah.
might just turn it into a webinar later or something if you have the customer willing to do that. And whereas now you get both in one go, and you have the opportunity to deliver it as a follow-up asset, package it all up together with your other sessions at that conference, like all of these different things. And the on-demand experience is, in my opinion, just as crucial as the live experience, because that's where you're going to get the longevity of the results of your event.
Right.
That's where you're going to be able to really track sort of evergreen content and be able to
Yeah. Yeah.
understand whether that's actually good for your next event or not. Like, all of that kind of stuff, I think, is just as important as the live experience, and can teach you as a marketer just as much about whether your event is interesting and relevant to your customers and prospects. So I think that'll be something that we start talking more about as well. Like, what are we going to do with all this content afterwards, now that the live event is over, and what does that experience look like, and how do we collect all the data that comes out of people watching that content or reading that content?
Right. It's like, I'd love to see the data on the on-demand content
Yeah.
initially, after, or during the whole thing, and then ongoing. I wonder even on my own content, if recorded content, is it a myth? Is it like, because I've heard the stat from our friends at Uberflip about like 87% of all content goes unconsumed by anyone ever.
Right.
Like, holy crap, you could be dooming your amazing webinar to like the depths of your website. But I also heard from really cool content gal, Deb Gabor, who was saying that she actually sells more to the people who don't attend than she does to the people who do. I don't know what that means, but all I know, it means maybe the recordings are important. I know she does some special emails because of it, but it does raise into question, like, what are we doing this for, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really encouraging marketers to think about events in a long-term life cycle perspective, and not
Okay.
just as this one-time, big bang event where it happens and it's over, and you don't really worry about it until you start planning for the next one. That all of that content that was created there is extremely valuable, and your audience, the majority of them probably weren't able to attend live, even
Right.
if they bought tickets, even if they registered. Like, they got sucked into a meeting, or there was some sort of emergency, or who knows what, so they weren't able to watch live. And so maybe when they have a moment to think about the problems that they actually need to solve in their business, they're going to go back and say, oh yeah, there was that event and there was that session I really wanted to check out and I didn't get the chance. Let me see if I can find it in the on-demand experience. and let me watch it a bit more thoughtfully with that intention of, I have a problem to solve and I'm looking for a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's when we need to think about the sessions and the actual content that's presented, as being useful in answering our customers and prospects questions to help them take that next step in their buying journey or in their customer journey with you, depending on what kind of event it is. And, I really don't see marketers thinking of the content that way yet. And also you can really use that content to, first of all, to get more registrations or get more people consuming the content immediately afterwards, but also to start promoting the next event that you're having and sort of use it as proof that you're actually delivering really valuable content and excellent speakers.
Right.
It's just already all there. And I think normally especially for B2B events, you kind of, there's the loyalty of a community that returns time and again, or there's the big name keynotes or celebrities that you attract. And like, again, that's probably just not going to be happening as much for virtual events. You might get the odd company that has, Adam Levine singing from his garage or whatever it is, but that's not going to be a reason to like spend money on a ticket necessarily, because
Right.
it's not the full experience. So
I
really
could
it's like,
literally get that by playing it on Spotify.
totally, or going to YouTube and just being like,
Right.
oh, let's watch him do this. So there has to be other value there, and you really need that proof of, yes, we were able to deliver this exceptional content and a great experience, and these speakers who really knew what they were talking about, in order to get people to register for your next thing.
Right.
So I think there are just lots of ways that you can remix all of that stuff, whether it's immediately after the fact, or in the long term leading up to the next event, whether it's the following year or the following quarter or whatever. Thinking more about that deliberately instead of having it be sort of a happy accident if you do use it, which I think most marketers, that's kind of what's happening today. There isn't a plan for the life cycle of all of that content. And there isn't a plan for, okay, we have this period before the event, we have this period when the event is live, and then we have this period after the event. What happens at each of those stages? What are the distinct campaigns? What's the distinct experience? What's the data that we're able to collect at all of those different stages? How are we going to analyze that? What insights are we trying to pull from that? Like, we don't really ask ourselves those questions too often. And so
Yeah.
I really want to encourage marketers to start thinking of it that way and be a little bit more deliberate about it in order to, get the most value and provide the best experience.
Right. Deliberate. I mean, being intentional about these things is half the battle. Just having a plan and knowing, instead of, you can't wing everything. I have a particular bias as it comes to events, and I wonder if you can help me out with this. And I know sometimes, I'll treat myself as the customer, and I'll be like, well, the customer won't like this because I don't like that. But I'm not always the customer, and very much often not always the customer, even if you're selling to the same person in the same industry or whatnot. But mine is around like the live events, and I love the live events, right? To your point, the concert in person, or seeing Hamilton in person. Not Disney Plus, not bad, but seeing it in person, there's an energy to it, and also that this is happening in front of you. It's live. The audience feedback. So for the speaker, when I'm a speaker, I love the audience feedback. Are you laughing at my jokes or not at all? Are you smiling? Can I fight that grim face you have and make you smile just a little bit? Or I don't know, you get a little feedback, or even questions or something, or they're zoned out, they're all on their phones. Great feedback. But you don't really have that on webinars. And so I think when I've done webinars, I'll get really interactive. I'll try to be like a Twitch TV person where it's like, hey, who's got this, and put it in the chat, and that kind of thing, to try to make it a little more fun. But I guess is there a valuable, tangible value for the live marketing events versus the recorded? Is there value there? Isn't there? Like, help me sort through that.
Yeah, I think there is value for the live events, and it's less just about the exact content that's presented, because like you said, you can just record it and throw it online and it's there. Some of the things that we've been experimenting with on our team that we've gotten great feedback from in terms of audience participation is, throwing up live polls and as much as it's interesting to see what other people are voting for, my theory is that it literally just pops. It's like a pop-up on your screen that
Yes.
gets you to like tune back into what's happening and click something and engage, and then you're kind of back into the conversation. And so you kind of see these like, waves of participation as you pop
Right.
those polls. And it also makes for sort of great extra content that you can insert into the recording or slides later.
Mm.
Because we use Zoom webinars right now, and even though you pop the polls during the webinar, it doesn't put it into the recording at this stage. So you kind of have to go back after the fact and like insert it into the slides.
Come on, Zoom,
But
get with it.
yeah, I feel like it should be just on the screen, but I know they're dealing with a lot right now.
A few hundred more users they didn't expect it to have.
Yeah. So I'm sure stuff like that is probably in the feature request Jira somewhere or something, and
Right.
it'll happen one day, but it's not there yet. So things like that where it gives you extra content to follow up with people, and you can kind of promise that even during the live event where it's like, okay, we're going to share all these poll results with you. You get instant feedback to even create more content from that. So there's sort of that factor. So polls are definitely one. For me, having a dedicated chat moderator who isn't one of the speakers and is engaged in the chat conversation and trying to keep it going is super important. So like I said, it's a real skill to be able to juggle presenting and chatting and Q&A. So having that chat moderator who's just sort of like the hype man or hype woman in the chat, trying to get everyone, and sort of like, if there's an interesting nugget that was dropped, like, oh, what do you think about that? Or how does that look like at your company? And, naming people, if they give good responses, asking follow-up questions. And then of course, the really great speakers will always be sort of skimming the chat as they go.
Yes.
And, doing what you mentioned, which is, hey guys, we're talking about this. How does that look at your company right now? And what kind of TV shows have you been binging lately? Like just kind of making it feel like more of a conversation, even though it isn't really, and they can't really speak back to you, but they can at least engage in the chat. And if you're lucky, then you get people not only talking to you, but also talking to each other and asking each other questions, identifying things about their business, doing a bit more out in the open publicly in the chat versus just submitting like anonymous questions in the Q&A. So, those kinds of things I think are really great. Everyone wants people to live tweet and all that kind of stuff, but I just don't see that happening, especially in B2B marketing. Twitter is kind of a crazy place these days. So
yeah, it is. Bunch of angry, goofy people on there.
Yeah. So
and
unless your target audience are social media marketers who are on there all the time for their job, I think that's a bit of a losing game.
Right.
So, stuff like that is meh. And one other thing that I would recommend is to think about small ball conversations that you can have where you can actually turn people's cameras and microphones on. We're part of an organization called Sales Assembly that has these great sort of roundtable sessions that are relatively small, and just getting people to come on and become part of a roundtable conversation. I know, Heinz Marketing has been doing their CMO talks where they have people on. And so, making it less of just a one-way presentation and more of facilitating a conversation in the same way that you would do at a meetup or something like that is really valuable. And that's part of the strategy that we've been doing with our customers, people who are already PathFactory users. And, normally we would interact with our customers a lot at in-person events. And so we'd get that time to get to know them, and they have their chance to kind of be like, oh, I was thinking about this strategy. Can you help me figure that out? So we've given them a few new options to actually come and engage with us and each other by having their cameras and microphones on. But, surprisingly, it takes a lot to convince some people to turn that stuff on. They're not always interested in engaging that way.
Yeah.
Very few people are like, they feel comfortable. And I think not a lot of companies have sort of encouraged cameras on. So people just feel like they're suddenly exposed, and it's almost like you're asking them to, walk into this spotlight totally naked in front of everybody, It's very nerve-wracking for them. So you just kind of have to be cognizant of that, and also very patient. Sometimes I have to be really friendly and be like, hey there, Casey, like, thanks so much for joining us. We'd love for you to turn your camera and microphone on and ask any questions. And, then nothing happens. You're like, okay, I get it. I'm shy too. No pressure here. We're all super friendly. Like, don't worry if you're not sure what to ask yet. Like, we just love to meet you and learn a bit more about, like, you kind of have to play the
Right.
role of like a super host, a super friendly, restaurant host, or
Right.
the
Yeah.
person at a front desk of a hotel, just really trying to like draw people out,
Sure.
because that comfort zone is not necessarily there yet, in the same way where you're seeing someone in person and you kind of have to reciprocate, because we're all just in like tiny people in screens right now.
For sure. I feel like at that point you have the hype woman you were talking about over in the corner being like, don't be a wimp. Everyone's got their cameras on. You've been in COVID for 7 months. You still don't have your camera on? Whoa, -1, like just like making fun of them. No, probably a bad idea, but I can totally see how
Idea for customers, but
good
maybe
cop,
for
bad
something
cop,
else.
right?
Yeah,
It's
maybe.
okay. You don't want to turn on your camera. That's so cute. The person's like, that's not cute. That's stupid. That person's stupid. Maybe their combined forces will get the image to show up. But I think people, thanks to COVID, people are actually doing a lot more video, thankfully, than they
Yeah.
would beforehand. Like beforehand, it was like weird to do that. I remember actually I had a chance to work with Zoom for a bit before all this, and we actually weren't even on Zoom. We were using GoToMeeting, and
Really?
they're like, no. We got to use our own meeting thing for our own when we're working together. So like,
Yeah.
okay. And that's how we discovered Zoom, was working with Zoom on Zoom. It's kind of meta, but they always turned their camera on. It was cool. And it was kind of like they were leading the way that way. So yeah, it's interesting to see how people change over time with this stuff. So you mentioned some of the different format. By the way, all the things you just mentioned, that's exciting. We should turn our attention, instead of having virtual booths and stuff, what kind of neat things like that can we put into all of these presentations? The hype woman, the panels, the videos, like having other people talk too and inviting them to ask questions on camera. And that's where this needs to go, to your point. In Anything to add? I know I wrote down length, format, and session early on, because you're like, you got to rethink all these three things. Yeah, talk to me about the length of time. We're not doing the long keynotes, I assume.
Yeah, I don't think so. If you're really just being a thought leader, then 5 minutes is probably a generous amount of time. And I know that you can't cover every single talking point in 5 minutes, but you're just not going to hold someone's attention for that long with a single speaker. So
Mm-hmm.
one of my biggest tips is definitely to have multiple speakers and have them play off of each other, and have don't have people talk, don't have a single person talk for longer than 5 minutes at a time, because I just
Wow.
don't think the human brain can process that. And so maybe you have a dual speaker situation or a panel situation where you can still convey the same content, but it's not just that one dude talking for half an hour at nothing,
Right.
and having no
I
idea
can
how
do
it's
that. I
landed.
can for sure do that, but you're right. It's not
Yeah, it's
easy.
not a good
Either not easy
experience.
or you do it terribly. Yeah, either way.
Yeah. So I think, that having at least one other co-speaker where you're alternating
Mm-hmm.
back and forth, and we see this a lot in podcasting. Like,
Yeah.
you have the guest, you have a conversation, and it's much more engaging than just no offense, hearing from Casey for half an hour and having you read off of I'm sure a
Make me
really
cry.
really well written script, or whoever it
You're
is. But
right.
I think people don't even really want to listen to Ira Glass talk for an hour. Like,
It's true.
and he's the most interesting man to listen to at times. So he
Yeah.
still hands off the mic to someone else after a few minutes. So if anyone thinks they're a better speaker than Ira Glass and more more compelling, then let me know. But
Right.
I think for the most part we're not, and we're just trying to share some information with our customers or prospects. And so having that short, so even if the whole thing is longer, at least breaking up into different speakers. And then also I think having specific sections. So instead of having it just like flow into one big long thing, like have specific breaks, partly for the live audience, but also so that it's easier to cut the on-demand file into multiple videos. Instead of delivering like a 60-minute long video to someone, like that's pretty intimidating to click on a 60-minute video and be like,
Yeah.
oh, I have to get through this now. And even if I watch it at like 2x speed, that's still half an hour. I
Right.
wish I could just like figure out what the most interesting or most relevant parts are.
Just
And
get to the
so,
point,
yeah, get to the point. So,
Yeah.
one thing we've started doing is, again, thinking about and planning that content in advance, both for the live experience, but also for on demand. So there are clear section breaks. And then afterwards, you can edit everything into shorter clips, and people can click on the clip that is most relevant to them based on the topic of that
Smart.
section. So, yeah, so it's just a better experience. And even though people might only consume like 3 out of the 6 clips or something, at least they're watching some of it and not just
Right.
bouncing away because they're so frustrated at having to figure out where is the good stuff in the 60-minute clip, or where is the stuff that's most relevant to me. So, I think that's something that, like, a best practice I've been sharing with a lot of our customers lately, as we talk about sort of best practices for virtual events, and they're all like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? That's such a great idea. So I think that's something that just is really obvious on the surface, but takes that little bit of extra planning on the front end and that little bit of extra work on the back end to chop the videos up. But really, it doesn't cost you anything extra. It just requires a bit of extra thinking and some quick video editing skills to just like quickly even open the videos in their Finder and crop them down. So
Yeah.
that's an easy fix.
This is good stuff. The idea of different speakers, even just hearing you and I, it's much more engaging for people too, because it's a change in, I know all different words, the timbre and the pitch, and like just hearing 2 different voices, you can't help but pay attention to it. Whereas we've all been in class where we can't barely manage to stay awake, to that one teacher who's droning on and saying their thing. It's like, oh, and one person, another person, maybe they're different personalities. There's so much stuff you can play with there. It's a great concept. And also the chunking of the content so that we can skip to, I want to get to the tactical part. Oh, I want to hear the strategy behind that. Or I want to go, letting people choose their own adventure with that content. And they're not, that's the benefit of hearing a recording versus the live. You have to wait and listen to everything that's said, whereas you could skip around. Give the people the ability to do that. That's the benefit. Let them do it.
Definitely. Yeah. I think
Wow.
everyone is on their own self-directed journey these days, and everyone wants it as personalized as possible. And the best way to really personalize it is to let them choose. So
Right.
I think that's a great point. And then, to your point about this monotonous voice that it often accompanies B2B virtual events, as speakers, we really have to think about what is coming out of our mouths, and how
Yes.
can we sort of not just speak at the same volume and pace and whatever the whole time. We're not just reading off of slides, which I think, there's that sort of death by slides
Yeah.
title that webinars get, unfortunately. And a big part of that isn't necessarily the slides, it's how people are speaking over the slides. So just keeping in mind, I think that it's still a performance, and you should still be as active and animated as you would be on a stage in front of a huge crowd of people. Just because you're behind a screen and speaking into this little microphone doesn't mean that you shouldn't do all of those things where you move your face and you use your hands and you speak at different paces and volumes and all that sort of stuff. You still need to do those things. And if you're practicing, you should still work those into your practice so that, again, it is just more interesting for people, not just visually, but also what they're hearing in their ears. So.
Right. Yeah. You're going. Take a break. Take a breath. Drink some water. And then that silence, right? It like gets people's attention. They're like, wait. What just happened? Did my audio just down me? Did this thing freeze up? Oh, it's taking a break, taking a breath. And then, the tempo changed and the style. You're right. There's a lot of things speakers could do. I think just even like you said earlier, being deliberate about it and caring. Just because you're the CTO of this company doesn't mean, like, let's practice. That's why they have speaking coaches. And it's that much more important now because there's no cookies to keep me occupied and I can't use my phone. I'm gone, right? Like, I'm not just sitting in the chair stuck there. I am like working on my assignment for work, and you're in the background, or I just close out of it. So that it's like that much more need to just be on top of things.
Yeah. And then one other tip, I'm assuming we'll move on at some point, but one other tip is just to give people something to look at that isn't just you on your screen or your slides on the screen. If you're talking about a report that you're delivering the results of, like, drop a link to the report and let them pop it open in their browser while they're reading it, so that it's not just I think it's impossible to expect people these days to stay glued into Zoom or whatever webinar tool you're using for that long, they're naturally going to click away. They're going to pick up their phone and start scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or whatever they're obsessed with these days. They're going to check their email. They're going to get Slack messages. So they're going to be distracted. So it's better if you distract them with something that's connected to the message that you're delivering, so they get it both ways. They're hearing it, they're seeing you talk about it, they're seeing the slides, and they also have, the content kind of open and they can look at it again later. So that's something I think a lot of people don't think about. They're like, oh, they'll just download it later, or we can send it in the follow-up, but you're really trying to hold their attention as long as possible. And I think we're all kidding ourselves if we think they're not going to click away during. So like distract them with your message. Don't let them get distracted by something else. They probably will at some point anyway, but at least let one of those distractions be your own content. So what we actually do when we have our run of show docs is we have the links ready to go, so the chat moderator can drop in the links at the right moment and kind of get people clicking away and looking at things while we're talking about it on the webinar, so that it's a bit more natural and it's just all ready to go. There's no fumbling to find it or attaching the right UTM parameters. We're really big on UTMs at PathFactory, so making sure it's all ready to go and we can sort of track that content consumption later is super important, and sort of seeing how many people click through during the webinar, like all that kind of stuff is super interesting. So I would just encourage marketers to think that way too. Don't wait for the follow-up because they may never open the follow-up email.
Right? You have them right now, so do whatever you can do to keep that attention.
They're a captive audience, so get them in there and get them looking at that content, get it open in their browser while you have their attention, because it's just so hard to get people's attention over and over again these days. So take advantage of it while you have it.
For sure. I appreciate you letting me bore into your brain here with all the, because you clearly have it figured out. Even though you said you're still optimizing and still learning, you are light years beyond what I've been seeing going on around me. So this is something that everyone needs to hear. And honestly, I probably would say I need to go check out a PathFactory webinar. Would that be the right thing? What should I check out?
Yeah, we have one tomorrow, actually. It's all about sales and marketing alignment. So we have our demand gen manager and one of our account executives doing this fun love fest together, talking about the things that we do. And so I know they have some fun stuff planned for that one. But I can also just send you a few examples of the recordings that we've done. You don't get the same chat and live poll dynamics, but sometimes you can get a sense for some of the other things I'm talking about. For sure. Just based on the recording. So I think
what we'll do is in the show notes, we'll link to the cool one you're talking about that's going to be tomorrow, but tomorrow may be 5 days ago or a month ago, whenever someone's listening to this. But what we can do is also link to if you have an events page, so people can sign up to just, first of all, and we'll talk more about PathFactory, but also just see what you're doing in the inner. I can't wait to see it. I mean, that sounds interesting. And I get to learn more about ABM and marketing. So good stuff. On that note, can we shift to talk a little bit more about ABM and get your take on it? And I don't know if it ties into the events or just overall, ABM. Do you have an approach to it? Everyone talks about it. There's buzz around it, and it's a really noisy topic.
It really is. And I worked for a really smart marketer at my last company, Jim Williams, who used to say, ABM is like teenage sex. Everyone says they're doing it. No one's actually doing it. Anyone who's doing it isn't doing it right. Or very well. And I think that's still true in 2020.
Jim. Jim. HR will be in your office tomorrow.
Jim doesn't care about HR.
Sounds true.
It is true. And, I think that's part of the reason why, the ABM Leadership Alliance, which was started by Demandbase, still exists, because it's a really tough strategy to get off the ground, to launch, to continue, to adapt. It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing, and as marketers we often like those set it and forget it things. So
we do.
I think it's evolving over time, whereas it used to be let's identify this huge group of accounts and do some vertical marketing or something like that, which now is just called good marketing, I think. When I think about back to what our very first ABM programs were here at PathFactory when I first started, over 3 years ago, that's kind of what we were calling ABM. Let's sort of agree with sales on what our ideal customer profile is, have, a list of top accounts, but it's a pretty big list, and just make sure we're marketing mostly to those people in the right places, and giving those people a bit of a special treatment. Whereas in 2020, I think there's a lot more even one-to-one account-based marketing that's happening these days, whether that's enabled by technology or just purely like a heavy manual lift. So there's that. And then I think there's also an emerging ABM for customers going on. So
Right.
we, at the last ABM Leadership Alliance virtual event, we had our customer Refinitiv on there talking, and I found her story super interesting because she wasn't talking about, okay, we're doing ABM to acquire new customers. They do one-to-one and one-to-few ABM programs for their customer base
Mm,
to ensure that they, are aware of all the stuff that they've purchased, they adopt it correctly, they're seeing
right.
value out of it, they have access to all the information that they need and the people they need all digitally, and they're using PathFactory to do that, which is a very unique use case actually. But I just found it super fascinating because I think, especially right now during the pandemic, a lot of companies are really doubling down on their customer base, and slowing new customer acquisition to a certain degree, or they're kind of
Yeah.
pulling back their investment. And so having a look at your current customers and making sure that they're super happy and they're super adopted, and potentially buying other products or expanding into new divisions. And I think that is increasingly where account-based marketing is going to go, because you already know a lot about them. And I think one of the challenges of ABM is we're often targeting top accounts that, yeah, we really want to have them as a customer, but we don't really know a whole lot about them. And so it's really, really tough to actually personalize a one-to-one or one-to-few program for them because you don't know. And if I think about one of the mistakes that definitely like I've made and we've made as a team is, going after big, big accounts that, yes, everyone would love to have, Google and Facebook and whatever
Right.
as their customer. But if you don't know what that individual team in that individual division in that individual region cares about, then you're just not going to get their attention, and it's going to be impossible to reel them in a reasonable amount of time.
It's
And we
true.
had the best success with companies that we were familiar with, had multiple sales processes with already, and we knew a lot about their needs and their
Interesting.
problems, and we could actually tailor the content that we were targeting at them to serve those needs, rather than just kind of throwing a cast and hoping that we're choosing the right topic, because I
Right.
really don't think that industry verticals is specific enough anymore.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
things can be so different, even at companies that maybe look like twins on paper. They might be at very different places in like their digital transformation, in their customer experience journey, in their marketing automation
Yeah.
sophistication. Like all of those things could be so different, and if they haven't invested in certain areas, then like they're just not going to, the messages that you're giving them that are a bit more general are just not going to resonate. And it has nothing to do with the industry they're in, and it has everything to do with their team and company priorities. So that's sort of one area that I think we often overlook as marketers, is just like, how much do we actually know about these people and what their
Yeah.
problems are, outside of like, hey, that's a cool account, let's go after them. So yeah, that's one area. And you
Well,
know
real quick, that's
yeah.
super eye-opening. If I feel like that's the perfect thing to say if you didn't want to do ABM. Does that
Sure.
break the thing altogether? Not being able, you can't. Great. I'd love to have Google as a client, but I don't know jack shit about how they're
Yeah.
using or not using, or how their team is. I mean, you could look into their team and the structure, but you wouldn't know what their biggest challenges are. You'd have to guess based on companies of that same size, I guess.
Yeah, which I don't think is like, that's not really the purpose of ABM. I mean, I think it kind of breaks it from a marketing perspective at that point. Definitely for me as a marketer, that's when I push back a little bit on the sales team and say, you need to do your homework a little bit more here. We can
Mm,
continue doing broad-based awareness and target Google as an account, from that perspective. But I don't think we're at the stage where we can really target them based on their problems and
right.
reel them in for a meaningful conversation. Like, I think you have to, again, like test the waters a little bit with a few people and a few different messages and see what they latch onto. And, there is other intelligence that you can do. So, I'll give away some of our secrets here. Like, since we're targeting marketers, we often see what their CMO has been talking about publicly in terms of priorities for the company. Every CMO, and the CMO tenure is so short these days that there are new CMOs all the time, and they like to be interviewed and announce all of their big plans and their priorities. So sometimes you can glean something from there. If you have contacts there, of course, going in and just asking those people, hey, what's up over there on that team, asking some questions. So, trying to at least get in there. It's not impossible. And you definitely have some things at your disposal to be able to do that. Even just looking at their website to see, what's going on their website can be a good indication sometimes. But
that's a good point.
There are other sources of information, and I'm sure the intent providers would want me to talk a little bit about intent, where you're kind of uncovering maybe other stuff that's going on and seeing are they really in the buying cycle. But I don't think that data is necessarily good enough to be able to tell you what message to deliver to those people.
Why are they in market?
Exactly. So, it does become a bit more difficult. It's not impossible, but I think you just have to have a longer time frame in your mind, especially if they're a large enterprise company, because at this stage they just may know nothing about you. And if you know nothing about them, then you're really starting out super, super cold. So it's
like, you don't know me, I don't know you, call me maybe, like, hey, let's hang out. Like, why are we hanging out?
Yeah. It becomes more of like, okay, you put up a billboard at the side of the highway and you're hoping that they see it, and call the number or something, or go to the URL, scan the QR code, but like they're probably not even going to notice it, to be honest, because there's so many other things going on. So you kind of have to try all these different ways to get their attention. And there are tools that as marketers we can give the salespeople too. Like, I often suggest that, as much as social selling has kind of become a cliche, if there are key people that you really want to get in front of, then follow them on LinkedIn, follow them on Twitter, start engaging in their posts, like get in front of them as a human being. And they're much more likely to open your LinkedIn message or open your email because you've actually supported them in some way. Like, you're not just this cold stranger, you're part of their community and you've been engaging with them in a meaningful way, which is sometimes not always what salespeople are incentivized to do. I think it's definitely changing, and there are great evangelists for that type of long-term relationship nurturing out there, but it's still, I think, a very underutilized tool. And even if some people do that, it's sometimes done in an inauthentic way, where it's obvious they're just trying to like check the boxes in order to like have permission to reach out, but that's not really the point. Like, the point is to really develop a relationship with that human. So I think you kind of have to work those into your ABM strategy as well, which again is very manual. It's a heavy lift. It requires a lot of trust between marketing and sales, that you're both kind of doing your part and you sort of divided the lines of responsibility. But like, that's what it takes to do it. It's not this sort of like, okay, we're going to turn on this amazing strategy and we're going to go and it's going to be amazing. And we're going to get all these accounts and we're not going to have to look at it ever again. Like, you're constantly like adjusting the list and figuring out where you are in that process and seeing how people are responding and tweaking. So like, it can take a lot of time to even just learn what might work and what might not work. I know, like, at the end of last year, we did a bunch of just different tests to see what like content formats people might respond to, whether and when it was sent from a salesperson versus when it came through an ad or a marketing email. So we tried a bunch of different things just to see what people might respond to, and we learned a lot, and that's where some of my insights are coming from now. But definitely it's tricky now during the pandemic, just because so many people are out of their jobs. Basically, like, all of your data, if your data sucks, it's hard to go after people, because it's like, do they still work there? Are they furloughed? Are they on like rolling furloughs? Like, there's just all these weird factors that make it really challenging. Are
they in the office? Because maybe you can't send them cookies. Like, they're not even there.
Yeah, like I know PFL has their cool sort of like, okay, someone can enter their home address, but then they have to like click on an email and go and feel comfortable giving you their personal data. And I know it works for some people, but it's just sort of extra friction in the process. Whereas before, you could just be like, bam, I just had like a ton of chocolate covered strawberries delivered to your office, and now you have to reply to my email, kind of thing. Or like, there's some level of like reciprocity inaction there. Whereas, it's just, you're asking them to do you a favor even before you've given them anything. So
Yeah.
the psychology is very different, even
Give
if
us your home address so we can be nice to you. It's like,
yeah, yeah, which, again, like I've definitely heard some marketers singing the praises of that feature, but there's just no denying the psychology of it is very different. And I think people already have to have some trust in you before they're going to do that. So you can't use that on super cold people.
For sure. You definitely can't do that. It just changes it up all over the place. Um, wow. I feel like this is one of the most practical discussions on ABM that I've had in a long time. And it started with you bringing up like a fantastic several objections of like, yeah, we definitely don't know what it is, but we're all talking about it. And then, yeah, we don't know anything about these people. We just picked them out of a chart and we thought that maybe they looked cool and they fit our demographics and firmographics, but we don't know. We don't know anything. So to your point, it's constantly changing the list or evaluating, okay, this company's off, this company's on. It's real work.
It is. And I think that's where the curiosity as a marketer comes in. It's not just enough to like look at the demographics of the company and say, oh, this is a good fit for us, so they should be on our target account list. It comes from having conversations with the account executives and with the
Right.
sales leaders, looking at Salesforce and seeing what data is available from past conversations, whether it's, a BDR got them on the phone one time a year ago, or, oh, we've actually gone through a sales cycle or maybe multiple sales cycles with them in the past. Just mining all of that data and bringing it into the picture.
Right.
Sometimes the salesperson has like a texting relationship with a key decision maker. And so it's like, okay, go back through all your texts and tell me what they were
Yeah.
telling you. And so you start to develop this like picture of their priorities, and only then can you really decide what is the most relevant content for them and like use that to get their attention. And I know that is scary for a lot of people because that's a heavy lift and it's really hard to scale. But I think
Yeah.
that's where you kind of have to start. And along the way, you'll learn how to scale it, or you'll get better and faster at it. You can establish processes where maybe moving forward, the account executives are kind of doing it themselves.
Yeah.
But that first time around, especially the first few times, you really have to just do the hard work, ask the tough questions, and hold things until you really know the answers to those questions, to a certain degree anyway.
Yeah. And that pushback on sales, I definitely took note of that when you're like, no, actually, you guys need to go do what you do best. I mean, we're not the scalpel here, right? We're the big spray over the whole area, or maybe we can get some laser beams in here, but like we need some human to human contact from you guys to do some investigation and help us figure out what are the pain points or what situation are they in. And again, not making it just like all about account-based marketing, but really getting sales to be involved too.
Absolutely. There's a partnership there. And I think it goes
Yeah.
back to, the old ways that sales was done, but more in a digital
Yeah.
way. And, I think in coming out of the era of marketing automation and marketing generating all these leads, and, sales just gets to kind of like cherry pick what they want, and that kind of stuff. Like that stuff is still there. But if you really want those top tier accounts, you can't wait for marketing to just deliver a hot lead and have it fall in your lap, or wait for that take a demo request. Like you really have to go back to those older practices and nurture those relationships one-on-one, which is tough for marketers to say to salespeople sometimes, because we're not in their shoes. We don't know exactly how hard their jobs are, and they have a lot of pressure. They're juggling a lot of things. So you really kind of have to build that credibility with them and not just be like, go do your job properly. You can't be that like nagging mother. They have to trust you and have to feel like it's a true partnership.
Right.
You have their back in these ways, and you're splitting things down the middle, and there's a clear division of labor, and it's going to all add up to this great thing that's going to help them close that deal, and ultimately get that check that they really want. So they
Right.
just have to feel like you have their back, and you have to hold each other accountable through great project management processes and that kind of stuff.
Interesting. Interesting. I feel like I could talk to you all day about ABM, but I don't have all day. So I want to ask you a few other things, but there is something there. So do your webinars address ABM as well?
Times. We
sometimes?
mostly talk about ABM through the ABM Leadership Alliance.
Yeah.
Account-based
Okay.
marketing is really sort of one way that people can use PathFactory. It's not sort of the number one key use case. It's just one of
Got it.
many. So we do
Nor is
cover
it
it
ever, right?
sometimes.
Back to your Jim's analogy. It's one of the
Yeah,
ways.
yeah,
Yeah.
one of the ways. And so, mostly we work with the alliance and try to reach that audience, to
That's
like people
cool.
who are super dedicated to learning about ABM. And so we do a lot of stuff with them, whether it's just about Path Factory or just trying to increase knowledge in general. One of our missions for this year was just sort of like, how can we advance the conversation and move beyond the basics a little bit more?
Who are you? How did you become so knowledgeable? All these, I imagine any kind of topic I could ask you about, you could go in deep and give me all sorts of strategy and tactics that aren't working. How could you take us back? Take us back in time, like little Cassandra. Like, did you always know you're gonna be in marketing? What was it like? Where'd you grow up?
No,
Who
I
are
did
you?
not. I did not know what marketing was,
Yeah.
really. So I was always a writer and a creator and a big nerd. I'll just say those three things together. Prolific reader and writer, writing sort of like fan fiction stories in middle school, like literally printing out stories and putting them in do-a-tangs and like handing them out to my friends on the schoolyard, like they were novels. And
For like
so
which shows though? Which shows? What kind of fan
it
shows?
wasn't for shows, it was like bands.
Oh,
So like boy
really?
bands, yeah. So it was like super embarrassing now, but yeah, that's a lot of how I started writing things that other people would actually read. And then in high school, I started building websites and learning Photoshop, and started out with like angelfire.com websites and moved into actually like learning HTML and CSS and building my own sites. And so just being, again, yeah, just a huge nerd basically, and publishing that content on those websites,
Yeah.
and just kind of going from there. And so in high school, I was like, okay, I like this writing thing. How can I be a writer? And I started my high school's newspaper for the first time ever. There was no school newspaper there before, and when I think back now, it was sort of like making a bit of a deal with the devil in terms of almost like a content marketing arrangement where
Yeah.
my school was not a big academic or creative school. It was more of a football school. And so my principal, when I went to ask him if I could start this newspaper, he was like, you can start it and I'll fund it if the football team is on the front cover of every issue. It has to be like
Wow.
a big picture of the team with like
Wow.
a recap of the last games or whatever. And as someone who is not sportsy at all and I never watched a football game at my high school ever. I was just kind of like, okay, that makes me like die inside a little bit, but I'll do it because I like basically he was telling me I could put whatever I wanted on the inside as long as I put the football team on the cover. So
Every time? Wouldn't that be monotonous though for the readers? Like, oh,
yeah.
look, it's our team
Yeah,
again.
I don't know. It was weird, but I did it. So yeah, it was interesting, and so I had to start it up and find other people to contribute to it, lay it out, and so just kind of learning all of those things. And I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to be a
Yeah.
journalist, and I want to write stories that aren't all about football teams. And so that was sort of when I decided what I was going to do. And there's a really great journalism school here in Toronto at Ryerson University. It's sort of known as um, the top journalism school in the country. Hopefully my husband isn't listening because he went to the other journalism school.
Of course he
And
did.
yeah, we get in fights all the time about which one is the best, but I went to Ryerson, so I say Ryerson is the best. And it just had a really great practical curriculum. You weren't learning about journalism from books. On like week 3, they were sending you out into the streets of downtown Toronto to
Wow.
talk to random strangers
As
and
you
report
should.
on
Yeah,
things.
that's the
Yeah.
real journalism.
Yeah. And so I was a pretty shy person and extremely scared of talking to strangers. And so it just sort of broke me of that. And
Hmm.
I still don't love walking up to people who are like standing outside of a mall smoking and asking them like, do you know that smoking is bad for you and you shouldn't be standing within 10 meters of a door of the mall like that? You
Jeez.
kind of had to like walk up to people and say things like that, or walk up to someone wearing like a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey during the NHL lockout and be like, how do you feel about the NHL being locked out right now? Like, even less chance that the Leafs are going to win the Stanley Cup. Like all just
Oh,
questions like
wow.
that.
Shots
Where,
fired.
yeah,
Yeah.
you have to be a little bit provocative to get them to talk to you. But in a city like Toronto, you never really know who you're going to bump into downtown. So
Right.
it was just a great education in talking to complete strangers about topics that you normally wouldn't really talk about, getting outside your comfort zone a lot, and writing a lot of stuff on deadline. You would get your assignment in the morning and you would have to report and then turn in a story before 6 p.m. that day, and everything had to be factually correct and everything had to be spelled correctly, and if you missed any of these details, then you would just fail the assignment. And so
Jeez.
really quickly you develop the ability to create content super fast, to be resourceful, to write excellent copy without much direction or feedback, really. Like you just have to turn it in and hope for the best.
Right.
And so, yeah, I got some really amazing experiences while I was at Ryerson, writing for the school newspaper, doing internships with some of the national newspapers here in Toronto, and that kind of thing. And, it was amazing, but it also made me realize that I don't necessarily want to be a journalist. I graduated.
What about it? Yeah. What about?
Yeah. So there are multiple factors. So I graduated in 2009 at the height of sort of the Great Recession, when every newspaper was laying off reporters left, right, and center. And, I was taking unpaid internships at first, but I was realizing that the people who were around me, the people who were like 3, 4, 5 years older than me, they were on their like 7th unpaid internship, and they had like a master's from NYU and like all of these extra things that I didn't have, and they were still not really getting paid for their work, and they were still serving on the side or whatever. And I just thought, like, hey man, I have tons of student debt. I didn't have my parents pay my way through school. I'm living in the most expensive city in the country. I have to make some money here. And so I was really lucky in my 3rd year of school to sort of fall into working for a startup, because I was a bit desperate to make money. And also I didn't want to work at Old Navy for another summer, just folding shirts for like $8 an hour.
God, you use those little folding machines, the board.
No, there's no time
board,
for that.
huh?
You just learn how to fold them. Yeah, you just do it. So I know how to fold a shirt now, but it was, I was tired of doing that for years and years.
Yeah.
So, I took a random, basically a sales job at a new startup that had just literally gone into business.
Okay.
And I sat in the same cubicle as the founder all summer that summer and just made cold calls and tried to hit my cold calling quota so that I could write blogs. And, it was sort of 2008 was the year that Twitter and Facebook were starting to become big outside of universities. And so starting some social media marketing and community engagement on those channels just to see what would happen. So just testing out all of those things and really enjoying it, and getting good feedback from my boss, who was the founder of the company, and thinking like, okay, maybe this is something like I can actually use my skills for other things than journalism.
Right.
It really sealed the deal for me. In my last year, I did an internship at the National Post, which is sort of like a more I'd say like more conservative leaning newspaper, where I learned all about, bias in journalism. And as much as I really hate all the fake news, like accusations that are being thrown around these days, but like every publication does have its own bias. And I really learned that through the way my editor guided my stories and went against my sort of more liberal sensibilities.
Sure. Or what was actually happening. You're like, this is, and then you get the feedback that's like, oh, well, how about you spin that a little bit? And you're like, ugh.
Yeah, so that definitely happened. And also, as a young reporter, you often get sent to sort of the worst stories, the worst things that are happening in humanity. So, just things like, oh, someone just got shot, and you have to go pound on their mom's door and like ask their mom how they feel about their son who just got shot. And, there's a baby who's waiting for like a heart transplant at Sick Kids Hospital, and you have to camp outside the hospital for 3 days waiting for this baby to live or die. Like those things just like made me feel like a terrible human being, and totally disconnected me from, what I thought I was doing as a journalist, because I just felt like I was taking advantage of people and exploiting their stories for clicks, basically. And so I just kind of became a little bit disenchanted with it. And, as I was leaning into the startup at the same time, I did my full-time internship at the National Post, and I was also working part-time at the startup, even in my last year of school. So just sort of switching gears naturally and falling into it. And so after I graduated, I went there and I basically started what at the time we called an online magazine, but it was a blog. It was just a company blog. And used it to actually grow the business and make it the #1 career site for students and recent grads in Canada at the time, and eventually launched in the US as well. And so, after a couple years of doing that and calling myself an editor and calling it an online magazine, I started to sort of search for information about how to do my job better. And I was like, wait a minute, this is a real thing. It's not just like me being a weird journalist trying to like fit into startup marketing. This is called content marketing, and there's a
Yes.
strategy that you can apply to
Yeah.
attract people and grow your business and even monetize the content sometimes. So once I started learning more about that, it just kind of clicked, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. I can do the storytelling. I can still interview people and ask a lot of questions and tell their stories, but do it for a purpose, and the purpose is
Right.
to grow this business. And for me, as long as I'm sort of connected with the purpose of the business, then it allows me to be passionate about it, be an evangelist for it, and create all that content. Hopefully
Yes.
it's high quality content that the audience actually wants. And I don't feel like I'm selling my soul to do that. So
Right.
that's kind of been my like personal career mission on that side, is like, okay, go work for interesting companies that are doing things that I think the world actually needs. It doesn't have to be saving lives or anything like that. It can just be like, oh, this solves a problem in the world, and I think that's a problem that's worth solving.
Totally.
Totally valid. And then use content to grow the business. And so I spent how many years? Spent like 5 years at Talonegg, and then I went to Influitive, which was sort of like my first B2B MarTech company, and
Yeah.
started learning more about like demand gen funnels. That's where I worked for Jim, and he worked at Eloqua before that, so he taught me all about marketing automation and funnels and waterfalls and leads and all the things that I just had no idea about, because we were just making stuff up at Talonegg when I was there. We were just kind of flying by the seats of our pants, and
Sure.
all recent grads who had no idea what we were doing, no marketing training, like we were just winging it and somehow doing a good job at it. So yeah, my B2B marketing education was more formalized at Influitive, and worked with an amazing team there. And that's when I started to realize like, oh, there's this relationship between content and demand gen that has to be in place, so that every content asset you create is for a specific purpose in the business, and the demand gen team knows what that purpose is and distributes it accordingly and measures it accordingly. So started getting really, really curious about that, partially because of just knowing that journey, but also because I would get in like these weird arguments with my counterpart in demand gen around what was working and what wasn't. And I started just like
Right.
asking a lot of questions. They're like, what channels are you delivering that, like those content assets on? I'm like, why do you say they don't work? And what audience segment did you market that to? And
Yeah.
realizing that, he wasn't always doing it the way that I would have done it. So just getting a little bit handsy and sticking my nose in where it doesn't belong, in order to be like, hey man, like if you want this to work, I designed it for this purpose. You have to deliver it on this channel to this audience at this time in the buyer's journey. Otherwise, of course, it's not going to work, because they're not ready for that message, or it's not for them.
Right.
So just really trying to gain an understanding of what he was doing, so that I could, ensure that my content was succeeding and not being like a total failure, and in return, me and my team being a total failure. So just learning there about demand gen, customer marketing, of course, because Influitive is sort of designed to be a great customer marketing and advocacy tool. And along the way, I met Elle Wolf, who was VP of marketing at Lookbook HQ at the time. And she sort of convinced me to join her team here, which was before we rebranded to PathFactory, and started out doing content marketing, and eventually through some musical chairs on the team, I was able to move into more of a hybrid role, where I'm still leading our content strategy and producing some of the content, but I'm also
Right.
overseeing demand gen and design and customer marketing. So a bit more of an integrated role, where I'm looking at the whole journey that people are going on, and trying to
Mm.
bring them through that journey, with delivering the right content to the right people at the right time in the buyer's journey, along the way. So it's been a great, another great education for me, and doing all these things like our rebrand and
Oof.
reshuffling our team, reprioritizing. We had a new CEO and leadership team come in last year, and so that was a big interesting change to kind of work for a whole new group of people. So lots of different things that I've learned along the way in 3 years here as well.
Yeah. It seems like at the beginning you just had to hustle, kind of like a journalist would, just figure it out. And you've realized that there's this, you and content have this path, this mutual path together. And then being able to take it a step further and just like you have with the events and all these other things, really figure out how to get the right content to the right people at the right time so that it's relevant to them and they're not just flying off and doing something else. Jeez. Jeez, I feel like I need to have you come back on here and just talk content with me for like hours
I
on
can
here. But
probably
like,
do that.
like let's plan on that. Otherwise, I would like need to ask you about that. But I guess what I'll say is like so now you're at PathFactory, and if you're hypothetical for you, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself at the beginning of your career, you just graduated from school, you're a journalist now, and you're like, what do I do? If you could tell yourself something like advice or any kind of things, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself to have more confidence in my own abilities. I think coming into marketing and startups with no business experience, no marketing experience or education, I had a lot of imposter syndrome over the years, and I kind of struggled to find my voice earlier in my career, where I was just like, I'm just going to put my head down and do good work and let it speak for itself. And that worked to a certain degree, but that's very limiting from a growth perspective. And
Yeah.
luckily I had some really great mentors who were sort of like, hey, when you do say something, it makes total sense and people want to listen to you and they trust you and you have really great ideas, so you should do that more.
Yes.
So just listening to them, I think I was a bit slow at actually figuring that out and feeling comfortable and confident, but once I started doing that, I felt a lot happier and more successful. I think I got a lot more done and my career started accelerating from there. So yeah, just having that confidence and not assuming that you're always the dumbest person in the room, which I think comes from like a journalist mindset where you are
Sure.
very curious and you don't want to walk in the door thinking you know everything. And as also as a woman in very male dominated environments, often in tech, like there's just that sort of
Oh yeah.
insecurity that can come where all these guys have all of this swagger and I'm just like, oh, like, do I really belong here? A bit of questioning that kind of stuff. But once I started being like, no, I should be here and I'm just as smart as everyone else here in my own way. I just need to apply that and make sure my voice is really heard. That's when things really started taking off. So yeah, just finding that voice a little earlier and having that confidence in my own abilities and decision making and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I can tell you now for sure. I've done a lot of interviews, but some of them stand out as ones where I'm like, holy shit, ping the team afterward, be like, guys, listen, like listen to this, like for the events, listen to this for ABM. The questions I'm asking are not like behind the sky made up things. They're like challenges that I experience and other people have asked me about. And I'm like, I have no idea. So you are definitely someone to listen to for sure. Have you thought of your own podcast one day? Like
I
I would
have.
tune in. I would be your first subscriber.
Yeah, interestingly, I thought about starting a podcast for one of my personal passions, which, I know we're going to get into this, which is,
Yeah.
backcountry canoe camping. My husband and I run like a blog and an Instagram account all about that. And so we've talked about, and he's a podcaster as well. He started multiple podcasts. And so we've talked about doing
Sick.
something around that. But it's sort of, we have that double-edged sword of like, content creation is both of our jobs all day every day, and so do we want to be doing that around our passion as well when we'd rather just be out there enjoying
True.
the thing? So definitely have thought about it, and some friends have encouraged me to start a marketing podcast as well, and of course every executive that I've worked for has wanted to start a podcast, but I've kind of push them off. Luckily, the ABM Leadership Alliance has a podcast this year, so I get
Oh,
to
good.
play around with that a little bit, have a
Yeah.
few episodes for PathFactory, but do more of like a water testing than just like me running a podcast. But yeah.
It's a great point. If you're making content for work, do you want to do it for the fun thing? And then it's fun unless you turn that into work. Like if you turn
Exactly.
the backcountry canoeing and can't, you got to tell me more about this. So literally just throwing everything you got in your backpack, getting in a canoe and just going. And you're in Canada, so you can just go for hundreds of miles and no one will ever find you. So you have plenty of wilderness and all these things.
Yeah, I mean, being in Toronto, you have to drive
True.
for a couple of hours to
True.
get out of the city. But luckily, within 3 to 4 hours, you have tons of amazing wilderness at your disposal. And it's actually busier this year than any other year because everyone is trying to get out of the city. So
Yeah.
it's incredibly hard to actually book booked campsites at
Oh,
certain
I'm
parks
sure.
this year, and the trails are all packed and the access points are packed. So it's been a really interesting year to have that hobby, because normally you see
Hmm.
nobody and everyone thinks you're super weird for doing that kind of thing. But now everyone's like, get me out of the city to get away from everybody. Like, give me all of your tips and your favorite spots. And they just
Right.
want to get out there too. So yeah, so we plan trips in advance. My husband used to be a canoe instructor and like a camp counselor who ran out trips at
Nice.
summer camps in high school and university. So he's really the expert and kind of sucked me into it once we started dating. And I fell in love with it because I love nature. And it's, having a job where you're so on screens all the time. And so
Yep.
just, sucked into Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn so many hours per day, to have that forced disconnection has been extremely healthy for me mentally, has encouraged me to set boundaries around work and screen time. And so when you literally don't have cell signal and you can't check your email and you can't see that Slack message from your boss, you can't scroll through social media, it's just incredibly I don't know, it's just so refreshing. And I think it just restores you for the tough stuff that you have to do when you do get back to the office or back to your computer. So yeah,
Right.
my favorite hobby for sure.
There's something about it. I actually went hiking yesterday. It's become a new tradition. Like every Tuesday morning, just I'm bouncing and I'm blocking it off and I'm going up. For about an hour and a half, I can get to mountains, the White Mountains of New Hampshire,
Nice.
um, and this epic hike, and it being 12 miles was terrible. It was great.
That's
Everything hurt
long,
by the
12
end,
miles. That's far.
Yeah, it was it was a long half morning day because it was like trailhead by 6 a.m. that kind of thing.
Right.
But when you go up this particular mountain and you're coming around the back side of it, I was able to see this area that didn't have anything. Right, it had a stream coming through it, but you can see for like miles. And I knew the highway was way on the other side of the other mountain, so it's like it was almost like this private area that no one else sees, and it's a little more populated just that much north. I mean, it gets wilder, especially in Canada. But it's just something about being like, okay, this is something that you have to earn to see it. To see this, you have to venture out. You'd have to canoe or you'd have to hike hours and to get here. And not everyone sees this. Just something felt special about that. I wonder, do you experience that when are you canoeing up? And do you do a lot of portages between lakes, and then you like
Oh yeah.
daisy chain them onto like way out in the middle of nowhere with no roads and all that?
Yeah, so that's the trick to getting away from people, is to do at least one portage and haul all your gear across land.
Yeah.
And I definitely, we're not super hardcore about it. There are people who are doing, they're basically doing like 12 miles in portages on their trips.
Whoa.
Sometimes not all at once, but if you add them all up together, we are
Jeez.
not those people. We like to do, I would say, like 1 to 3 portages, and like they all have to be under a kilometer,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, where because the gear you're carrying is heavy and the
Totally. It's
canoe
everything you
itself
need,
is
right?
heavy. Yeah, so you kind of have to be careful that you're not like killing yourself to get out there, because it's like it's our relaxation. And so
Yeah.
that you're always trying to achieve that balance between difficulty and enjoyment. And I think there is a balance to be found there. And the thing that I really like about it, that I've kind of realized over the years, is that just like in journalism, it like forces me outside of my comfort zone. It's a little bit unpredictable. You have to adapt to the conditions, and even just stupid things. Like we went out this past weekend, and someone who was packing all of our stuff forgot to pack our sleeping bags and our cups. So we had to sort of, like, we got there and we're like unpacking, and we realized, oh no, we don't have sleeping bags or cups. Luckily, it's like the height of summer, and
It
so
is.
not having a sleeping bag is not the end of the world, but like it's still nice from like a comfort perspective to have sleeping
Yeah.
bags. So we used like our towels and our hammocks
Oh,
as
jeez.
blankets.
Oh, you're in
And
hammocks.
no, we weren't in hammocks. We
No.
just have hammocks to
Oh,
like
you just have them.
read in and stuff. Yeah, like they're just like comfy, casual hammocks. So we just kind of like pulled them into our tent and spread those across ourselves. And then we use bowls for cups. Like we were like making our coffee in bowls. So you can adapt, and
Yeah.
you just don't have all the comforts of home and the ability to just like order anything on Amazon and have it show up 2 hours later. Like you're sort
Yeah.
of, you have what you have, and it's all
Yeah.
about the preparation. And things may not go exactly to plan. It may look different than you expect. There may be way more bugs, or it might be colder, or it might rain the whole time. Like you have to actually deal with adversity. And I know there's like an incredible
Right.
amount of privilege in me saying that out loud, that like, I'm looking to these experiences to experience that that sort of like challenge, but you know
Sure.
pretty comfy to like sit at home all day and stare at a screen. There's not a lot of adversity aside from like boredom and eye fatigue that go
Right.
into that. Incredibly lucky to have a good job and a roof over my head and all the things that I would
Totally.
need. So just trying to find that challenge and to push my body and my mind a bit farther than I would think I could go when I live in a super cosmopolitan city like Toronto, where again you can get any food you want at any hour of the day, and jump in an Uber and you don't have to like really worry about how am I going to get places and what am I going to do. Although right now there's like nothing to do because we're in a pandemic, but
True.
normally you have anything that you could ever possibly want to do. And so how do you sit with your own mind and deal with those physical challenges? So that's a big reason why I go out there, and also just to connect with nature. I'm not a super religious person, but there is a bit of like spirituality that kind of happens out there, when you're kind of not just thinking about like paying your bills and cleaning your laundry and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, taking it in, just the sights, and I definitely have appreciated that more and more over time. I don't know, it's something to think about. Maybe you try it out sometimes. Have you heard of Joe Robinet? You heard of him?
yes, I couldn't say exactly what he does,
He
but
was
the
on that
name's
Alive TV show, I think it was.
okay.
People are stranded out there. But he's constantly going out with his dog and canoeing and catching a fish, and there's something peaceful about watching him do that.
Yeah.
But
But yeah, I
yeah,
survive winter by watching other people's tripping videos
I
because I'm just like,
totally.
I can't wait for the water to not be solid and so I
Right.
can paddle it again. Yeah.
Right. Man, this is crazy. Well, where can people connect with you? What social platforms should they reach out on? And obviously they should say where they heard you, but what platforms, what URLs? Hit me.
Sure. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn all the time. That's the number one place. I'm also on Twitter at Cassandra Jowett. And, I'm pretty accessible by email. If people want to email me, Cassandra@PathFactory.com. I'm all about those first name only startup email addresses. So it's
Yep.
like the perk of having my name is like almost no one else will have been a Cassandra at a startup before me. So
That's
I
right.
always get Cassandra at, and it's awesome. So yeah, those three places are really the thing. And you kind of mentioned my secret Slack at the beginning, so I'll just say
Yes.
if you're a content marketer, who's looking for like a community of people to bounce ideas off of, ask questions, talk about salaries or freelance rates, all that kind of stuff, send me an email, tell me a bit about yourself, and I'm happy to invite you to that as well.
Got it. Do you want them to send you an email or a LinkedIn thing or?
Whatever. Yeah, whatever. I'm easy. I'm
Okay.
on all those things all the time. So I'm a bit of a like communication addict. Like it's a problem.
I hear
I'm
you.
in about like 47 Slacks at this point. Not really, but a lot. And I always have a million tabs open. So I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
Absolutely. Unless you're out canoeing, in which case there's no
Exactly.
Wi-Fi, there's no cell coverage.
Yeah. If I don't respond within a day, it means I'm on a canoe trip,
That's
basically.
it. Yeah. Do not disturb at that point. Well, Cassandra, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here. I've learned
Thanks
a
for having
whole
me.
heck
Yeah.
of a lot. Yeah, this has been fun. Like really good stuff.
Great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And it was super fun to talk your ear off for like 90 minutes
I
almost.
know. I know.
So
That's
thanks
how
for the
you,
opportunity. It's been really fun.
when time flies, that's just what happens. See, I don't know if we could ever do a canoe trip because we talk about marketing the whole time, we'd have to just
Yeah.
talk about like not marketing. Um, amazing. Well, for those people listening, if you learned something, and I freaking know you do or I know you did, because I literally have 2 pages of notes front and back. I even ran out of space on there, had to go in the margins. So, share this with someone. If you learned something from this conversation, we talked about the events, shifting up the different styles, the length, the format, the session, the timing of it all. Don't lack creativity. Get out there, change things up. The ABM side as well. Stilling the mist. So much stuff here. If you learn something, share this on LinkedIn. Tag everyone. Tag me. Tag Cassandra. And we will comment and we will engage with you. That's what thought leadership is. Do that. And you'll be surprised by the results. And with that, thank you again, Cassandra. Thank you so much. It's been super fun.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Hey guys, this has been the Hardcore Marketing Show. We will catch you all next time.